And I assume that
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Here we
hello.
go.
Hello, everyone. This is Richard Hewson filling in for Mike McGinnis, who's having internet problems. He's made me the host, so everyone has to do what I say this time. Either that, or we're actually going to talk about the purpose of the ego, which is what we've been batting around a little bit before we started this recording session. And as Jeff had said, everybody has an ego and needs an ego in order to live in this world. But how do you balance it? That's what we're debating at the moment. Who wants to jump in first?
Well, I started off the conversation based on a movie that I had watched where the people in the movie started to have awakenings. And it was a natural occurrence for them. They weren't trying to have an awakening. It was a part of their experience that they had shared. And there came a point at which it became clear that some of the people in the group, or at least one particular person in the group, started to have, I guess, people were revering this person. They were literally worshiping the people that had these shared experiences and putting them, elevating them up at some kind of, higher being than themselves. And that's not what the intention of any of the people in the experience had. They were just trying to, they just were having this experience and trying to make the best of it and help the people that they were aware of that they were led to help. But one of the people in particular started a church based, people were in a sense coming to him, and I guess his ego got involved in it, and where he needed maybe to have his ego bolstered. He probably felt less than worthy, and so for him it became a way of helping to enhance his ego, but it got carried away, and it was noticed by some of the other people in the group, and they didn't want anything to do with it. And so, because the people were very naive, it reminded me of some other people that we know of who get involved in power and what happens to them uh, where they misuse that power. So if you, so it has, my initial thought was about awakening or about spiritual evolvement and illumination, if we want to call that, where you have awarenesses and gifts that come to you. And when, what's the appropriate use of those gifts in terms of how to support yourself financially? If you're going to be sharing those gifts and traveling all over the place and writing books, um, you need to have your body taken care of in order to be a good instrument or to be a good vessel for sharing that information. And that's certainly one of the needs. If you're going to share information, you have to take care of yourself. You have to be strong enough to endure the travel. You have to have a clear mind, healthy body, and you can't do that if you're living on a shoestring. If you're just making ends meet, basically, you will burn out. But there are some people where it seems to go well beyond that. Some of the mega churches and things like that, we start to look at private airplanes and mansions and all of that. And people that are making those contributions. Jeff, you brought up some of the early things that we participated in. Um, you would not have been able to afford to go to have some of these experiences. And I'm sure a lot of people in some of these churches barely enough to get by on, but they feel like they have to contribute in order to get a blessing. That there's some kind of quid pro there, quo, whatever that is called, where you have to do this in order to get a blessing. And, that becomes an issue for me anyway, where it becomes excessive.
And something that pops into my mind is how does one, or how do we, or how do people who are, say, going to one of these mega churches or whatever organization it may be, how do we determine what is excessive? Because I don't know, perhaps having a Lear jet and being able to travel, quickly and efficiently to all of the places that you're teaching, maybe that's what is necessary. Maybe that facilitates.
That's often the justification for that.
So I've often used the example of, again, I'm not, God bless, but Imelda Marcos's shoes. You remember that? She had rooms full of shoes. Now, was it the shoes that were the issue? Because if I'm engaged in spiritual work and I'm trying to make a difference, and I've got my tie-dye on, I've got my Birkenstocks on, I got a pair of, multicolored pants on, I got my long hair, and I waltz into some board somewhere, are they going to take me seriously? But if I walk in a three-piece suit with a good pair of shoes, what they consider a good pair of shoes, with my hair at least trimmed, will they take me more seriously?
So what would be excessive in your mind?
It becomes a matter of, in that situation, do I need, in order to fulfill my divine purpose, all those shoes? If I do, have all those shoes. Or are those shoes simply feeding the fact that I don't know what my divine purpose is? And I am simply trying to bolster a flagging ego. Like what you said before, Tom, about feeling worthy.
Mm-hmm.
That's big, I think. Because again, when we start, how many of us feel worthy of understanding that we can be illumined humans in this world? How many of us can embrace that worthiness and actually even understand that it doesn't even matter because we are? Yet most of us have a hard time even thinking we're worthy of having successful lives, whatever that may look like, let alone feel worthy of being in the presence of the divine.
Yeah, that worthiness. I hear often people will say, "I'm unworthy."
Exactly.
Especially in Christian circles, I'm unworthy. I'm unworthy. There's a kind of a sense in those circles of people being not people the human not being worthy, being born in sin, basically, or being sinful by nature. And so it's that cleansing and that baptism and the becoming worthy, and that is a part of that scenario. But I still hear it even after being saved. I'm unworthy. I'm unworthy. And that's just interesting to me that there is this kind of tamping down of the ego in those contexts.
So is it a tamping down of the ego or a show of tamping down of ego? Because there's a thing about, look at me, how humble I am.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Jerry Lewis, something about, his humility is greater than anyone's. Something like that. I forget the exact quote.
Right.
Somebody did
I'm the most unworthy of all.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm so unworthy that I need your money to help me become stronger.
So there's this degree of self-honesty that needs to be really, really subtle, take really, really subtle readings about yourself, about why you're dressing up in the three-piece suit,
Right.
or have the Learjet, or do you honestly need the Learjet to get your stuff done? I mean, the Dalai Lama almost does. You know, the president of a country needs of a large country like the United States needs Air Force One to get everywhere and do whatever he's doing. Whether it's spiritual or not, he needs that equipment. And for us, just as Americans, we generally need a car, which a lot of the world simply does not have. But we need it to have our life. Or you're going to have a much smaller life without. And if you're, I mean, it's so much extra work to do the St. Francis of Assisi thing, to purposely never wear shoes all year long and only accept enough food for that day. Don't store another apple for tomorrow. That's an extreme event. It's an extreme situation. But Imelda Marcos is extreme, and Jim and Tammy Faye Baker were extreme. You know, on the other side, and they justified it in their minds. They justified it to themselves, and well enough that other people sent them all this money. But the reality of it, what are they really doing? As Tom says, when the life review comes, all those head games are useless. You know the real situation, and so it behooves us to discern that now, so that we do a better job now.
Yeah, it's a matter of knowing within yourself, of being able to discern. So it's when it comes, the question comes is, do I need this, or is this just a wish or a dream, or something I want? You know, just because I want to do something or another. To be able to have that conversation in yourself with your ego. You know, there is a multifaceted personality really in yourself. I mean, you have conversations with yourself. So who's having the conversation? Is it your higher self, your lower self, your ego, your superconscious? You know, who is having that conversation, and who's in charge? You know, is it a consensus that makes the decision, or is it the higher self makes the choice? Or
well,
it comes down to I won the last argument, so I want to win the next one. That's fair, right? Both sides.
I think that consensus. I mean, certainly we can all agree that we shouldn't be out there selling tickets to heaven. You know, I don't know what it was that Jim and Tammy Faye had that people found so appealing. You know, beyond something like that, something as superficial. But I kind of wanted to circle back to what we were talking about previously, which was if we have some sort of spiritual enlightenment, some sort of spiritual gift, I think you said, Jeff, if we have a near-death experience, or we have a spontaneous spiritual awakening of some kind, you know, and Jeff, you said earlier, I think before we recorded, that the mystics would say that it's an experience that you've gained, an enlightenment you've gained, but as soon as you open your mouth, your ego is at play, and it was involved, and that makes perfect sense. I guess the mystics would also say that when we are born, we're coming from a completely spiritual experience, and then we forget. We adapt this ego human business, and we get further and further away from it. So if suddenly we can have an event to tap back into it, or through many weeks of meditation, however we get there, that we could be viewed as having some type of gift. We have some type of enlightenment that perhaps other people don't have. So you raised the question, what criteria can there be to determine how much is too much? How much ego can you allow to be what decisions your free will makes to do with your gift? And I mean, it's my belief that we are born coming from spiritual. We're born with our truth. And it's not that we live our lives and try to find our truth. It's already there. We just have experiences that reveal our truth to us. You know, you read a book and you say, boy, that rings true. Or that, you know, it's kind of something that is clearing the clutter away for you to be able to see something. But so if you're able to see more clearly how much, and you're Richard, you're reckoning you're talking about with yourself, you're able to see how much your ego is at play. And you know, am I being greedy here? Am I being selfish here? Or is my intention to do as much good for other people and the world as I can do? One thing I liked a lot about Tom Sawyer was that he seemed to have a lot of humility. He could have been a Jim Baker if he had wanted to. I mean, he had that ability. He could have been driving, riding in limousines and flying in jets. But what did he do? He continued to be a road crew guy, a heavy equipment operator, you know, and it's almost like I saw that as him driving a stake in the ground. You know, just being here, this is who I am. You know, this is my truth. Yes, I can help people too, but this is my job. I want to do this job. And he never struck me as being anybody that needed to have his ego fed, needed aggrandizement in any way. So Jeff, it's always going to be a judgment call. We're going to have to use our egos based upon what we know of the world to say, this person is driven by greed, or it's just too much ego involvement, or it's not. It's always going to be an individual basis thing, I think.
And the mystics, and I mean, most of what, at least from what I know of us, follow mystic traditions, because it's the mystic tradition of whatever the religion may be that emphasizes that direct experience. And once, direct experience, once the immersion and the ability, because again, most of us, you can have, I mean, when in the initial years with the priesthood, the order of Melchizedek, I mean, there was all kinds of wonderful experiences. There wasn't just one. There was all kinds. And I think partly because there was, they needed to keep happening in order to get through, which I think has continued. But the idea is then, when we return to our physical beings and we begin to inhabit our bodies, which means inhabiting our egos, do our egos then service the vision?
Right, good.
Can I point the way? Because what the mystics did was give a roadmap. They often actually kind of refrained from saying, this was what I experienced. They did some of that, but they knew as soon as they were doing that, it was their ego talking. And there was a danger there. And so what they would say was, okay, there was this incredible experience and it's there. This is how you can do it. This is how you can have the experience. What did Jesus do? Same thing. He just laid out the path. What is yoga? The path, not the path, a path. What is, name one, a path. Follow it. Have your experience, because then you can turn around and go, this is what can happen.
Ultimately, we're wanting people to unite or to come together in wholeness and in love for, a higher purpose. I mean,
Yeah.
we want everybody to be in love, right? To be
Yes.
held in love. And that if you've had that experience, that's what you're trying to get to. That's why you want to have people, because there's a sense of, well, the more people, the better. The more, because there's all this activity going on around us that feels less than loving. That's not my ideal way to live. So if I'm going to be here, I would rather people be loving than to have all this banging and crashing and negativity around me, or around anyone else. So trying to heal all of those circumstances and bring people into that loving environment without judging whether this is the right path or the wrong path. It's not
Right.
the path that's important. I mean, it is a path that's important, but that's the dilemma here, because some people say that they own the path. This is the only path. And so if it's the only path, then your path is wrong. And there's a judgment there. And that eliminates a whole bunch of people, because they might feel, well, I'm not worthy because I'm not this, and maybe I should become that. So they're out of fear, they join this dogma, or this kind of religious thing that puts everybody else down for their own. The ego, the religion itself can be lifting itself up above everybody else.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of those smashers and crashers will go to church on Sunday and talk about love.
Right.
But actually doing that to feel connected to all human beings and to share love with all human beings, that's what a lot of us want, to all be, going in that direction, and to recognize our at oneness. But that's what it takes. It seems to take a really special person to get other people to go along. But I think the most important thing is that they not lead with their egos, that they lead by example in a very spiritual way. And very few people do that. The Dalai Lama, I mean, there are some people who do, but it's a tricky thing. And again, I can only use my ego and my judgment to know who those people are. Even, I mean, one should follow their heart, I suppose, and who they trust. But yeah, the people who are only religious for 1 hour a week in church, I mean, that doesn't feel, I feel nothing in my heart, with that type of the dogma and that stuff. I just don't.
I feel uncomfortable in that environment. I mean, I've been, in certain circumstances where I was there because of whatever reason. It wasn't necessarily my choice to be there. I was taking somebody there, or I was in that situation. Go to a funeral, a friend of yours, and have a sermon.
Right.
Basically, you're all going to go to hell unless you go this and do that. And it's like, wait a minute, I thought we were here for this person, to remember their life, to send them on their way or whatever. But I feel really uncomfortable in that kind of dogmatic circle.
I've got three stories rolling around in my head. One was along the line of what you're saying there, Tom. I went to a friend's church way out in the country, tiny little Methodist church that had been there since the 1800s. and everyone was welcoming and pleasant and polite and kind and decent and loving, but don't sit in their pew.
Right. I've been there.
Yeah. Another one is another story in my head is about Padre Pio. And while with all the amazing things, amazing love he was capable of, Tom, it's when he was told to stay, that he was getting to be too big and was threatening the structure of the church itself, he was told to stay in his monastery, and he did. And in his mind, he's going, I am following the orders of my superiors. Tom says that's a game. He was playing the game of humility. And of course, he was spotted hundreds of miles away several times by locating and all that kind of stuff, even though he never left his little building. But to agree to his agreement to follow the obedience was a game of humility. Yes, I will. Watch me be humble.
So
Even
when you
though
say game, was it a matter of him pretending to be, or just using like in a play where
in a
you're trying
mental
to portray?
game within himself,
Mhm.
that he was told to, and he
It
did
wasn't fake. It wasn't fake.
It wasn't. A true humility is almost impossible to explain. It's the absence of, which is hard to explain. And a game humility is, yes, I will do what you say. I will follow the rules and do what my superiors tell me. That's the game of it. Tom used the word game, but he wasn't playing a game on them. He was playing a game on himself, that this is the way to be humble, is to simply follow orders.
So it was a technique to maintain humility. Is that what you're saying?
No, it did not. It wasn't humility.
Oh, it wasn't. Okay.
It was
That's
a
what I'm
fake
trying to get to.
humility to
Right.
simply follow orders. It's like, here's the rules of how to be humble. Okay, I'll follow them. Well, that's not humility. Humility is the absence of all kinds of things, not just the following of orders.
And you're
It's a
saying you
subtle-
can't really try to be humble. You have to just gotta naturally be
Right.
somehow.
Yeah, it's like Tom. One of the things that Tom has said, he's at the time in the '80s and whatnot, he was one of the few near-death experiencers who wasn't changing his story little by little as it went along. You'd upgrade it, make it a little more sensational. Da, 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 da. One of the things I noticed about people who were advertising their books and whatnot, it went from having a near-death experience to, well, I've had 2, well, I've had 3, well, I've had 6. It became the numbers of them you've had to be known to the audience. It doesn't sit well with me that becomes part of the promotion.
That kind of gets into what I was talking about when we started out, this notion of, pumping yourself up
Yeah.
with the experience, and how do you avoid that?
Right. Will I sell more books if I've had 6 near-death experiences? Will I be seen as more of an authority? Will people listen a little more? Will I get a few more people calling me for a healing or a reading or something?
Mm-hmm.
That's all stuff you really got to be able to notice in your own head. what you are doing these things for.
Right. And again, you're right that if they're doing it for the wrong reasons and the people send them their money, the people are naive because they're not revealing a truth in those people. They're just buying the game. They're buying into the game.
Yeah.
I don't see how an individual could not know what it is they're offering. And I don't understand how an individual cannot listen to somebody and know, not by how many death experiences they've had, but from what they say. Does what they say have that ring of truth to it?
Yeah.
Does it make sense? And do you believe that? To me, that's how you judge what an individual is offering to you.
And my understanding of that is you make your best judgment, your best discernment, depending on how it resonates within you, and that becomes your lesson in this life. You go, oh, I followed that person? Yikes. What was I doing? Or, okay, thankfully, I was, as Casey says, I was aligned with divine will or the creative forces.
Which is what we're born from, which
Yeah.
we at some level, we all have it. We know what it is.
Right.
It's just getting back to it.
But there comes to the point of choice, that we have free will.
Yes.
And that the free will can give you the opportunity to gain from anything, from your experiences, or to say, well, I'm going to just use this gift that I have to make a whole bunch of money and be happy, or if you know better, which I assume if you become that aware, you're going to know something. You're going to have some sense about what right and wrong is, quote unquote, or being able to discern between your ego and yourself and find a good, happy marriage between the two. To say, well, my ego certainly needs to be supported, and I'm going to be able to do that, and continually check myself to make sure I'm not getting out of bounds. You would have that knowledge, I would think, in that level of enlightenment. And then you simply make the choice, hey, I can get real rich here, or I cannot do that, and I'm going to go this path.
I mean,
Go ahead.
The true psychics, people who really have psychic abilities, all they have to do is go buy a winning lottery ticket,
Yeah.
It's really easy. If that's all they're interested in, if that's, all they care about is their greed and totally give into that. But yeah, that's the other extreme, or do you want to kind of blend it in and say, well, I'm going to do this and kind of promise people stuff and, get wealthy that way, that way I'm not being so directly, violating my spiritual truth,
It can be
Or
subtle.
do you have no greed at all and you just want to help people and help bring them in to the fold of love?
And you may not know that you're doing that. You may not know that your ego is involved. You might just be making all these thinking, assuming that you're doing this out of altruism and this is the right path, and still be doing it out of ego and not even realize it.
I don't think my brain has ever tricked me into doing something I wasn't aware of.
I met a woman many years ago who had a near-death experience, and she would say, boy, was I ever egotistical before. I was just, everything was ego, but I had it all burned out of me in that experience. It burned deep and burned hard, and I have no ego now. But almost everyone who met her went, holy crap, what an ego she has. She was saying the experience of having it burned out, she remembers the pain of it, but didn't learn the lesson of it.
Because again, as soon as you enter back into your body, unless you've done that homework,
Yeah.
the ego will be there.
Oh
It's
yeah.
and it needs to be waiting. And I think, you know, we can be with teachers and glean from them what is going to further our purpose, or what's going to further our evolution, and leave the rest.
Yeah.
You know, we don't have to be in the presence of totally illumined people in order to learn from them.
That's right.
So I can learn from I've learned, God knows the numbers of people I've learned from. And so I can take that, I can use that, it can become part of my evolution. That doesn't mean that this person isn't illumined, so I can just ignore everything they say. Because that can be a mistake. Now, does that mean that I should give my entire life to this person, even though I know that they're kind of not altogether illumined, you know? Well, probably not. And discernment becomes important. And, you know, you come back to even asana practice. I mean, asana practice, which I have spent decades immersed in, is a double-edged sword. It can feed your ego. Look what asana I can do. Take my class, because I can show you this asana, and I'll be able to teach you how to do it.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Or that asana can be used to create the internal experience of what it is to be in love. And I don't mean in love in, I'm going to say, materialistic sense, but in that deep spiritual understanding of what love is. And so a lot of people will say, oh, well, don't practice asana because it's just going to feed your ego. Well, it can go both ways. Asana can be a tool to utilize. It can also be a cul-de-sac that I get caught in. The choice is mine. And some of that depends on the teachers.
Oh, if you've got a teacher this just popped into my head when you said that, if you have a teacher who is not discerning their own ego, and then you can think, oh, that's okay to do. But if you got a teacher
If you have a teacher,
really watching what they're doing, then you learn to watch what you're doing as well, which I think we all got some degree of from Tom. You know, so whatever degree we got, it certainly, we learned the lesson. He offered the lesson for us.
Discerning your ego, delineating your spirit from your ego. And you're right, Jeff, what you said before, we have to have our ego. So I think it's probably incorrect to try to totally suppress our egos. All we can do is temper our egos. You know, that we have to use it our ego to some extent, but we can temper it. And that's the only way we can keep it under control, I think.
Well, I see it as a relationship. I mean, I think that there's the impression that the ego is the bad child or something. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing. And so it's a relationship within yourself of your ego, which is a good thing, and your higher spiritual self, which is a good thing. And their conversation with each other, or their interaction, giving the ego a job, boosting your ego in the sense of saying, well, you've got a place, you've got a healthy place to be, and here's how we can work together. And so when you find yourself judging someone or judging yourself, even, you can be more gentle on yourself, on your ego, or not giving your higher self more power than it deserves, to say, well, I have a voice here too. And So having that voice, that conversation in yourself, sounds like maybe you're schizophrenic or something, but it really, there is a conversation I think we have with ourselves all the time. And it's a matter of honoring those, and maybe there's more than, I mean, there's more than just your ego and your higher self. I think there's lots of parts of us, lots of voices in us from experiences that come together for the purpose of lifting us all higher and lifting us into love. And if that's a group decision or a consensus, as I was referring to earlier, then if everybody's purpose is to raise us all to a higher level and in love, we're going to work together towards that. And each part of us has a role to play in that.
So you're saying they're kind of partners, kind of like
Exactly.
a yin and a yang.
Yeah.
I mean, ideally,
Right.
and it would be that kind of harmonious partnership.
Mm-hmm.
The wild child and the kind and tolerant philosopher.
Right, right.
An image pops into my mind, and I have to say I've read the image. I didn't make it up, but that part of the process, and we actually mentioned this a little earlier. As far as we open ourselves up to understanding the divinity we are, and that pours through us. And the ego is simply that aspect that takes that essence and manifests it in this world. It's no more, it's no less. And the fact that we have taken our egos and elevated them to the status of be all and end all is not the mistake of the ego.
Mm.
So it's a matter of understanding that essence, that connection is always present. If we become still enough, to come back to my joke, meditating 3 or 4 hours a day, to become still enough to hear it. And then the ego can go, here's what I can implement. And implement that divine presence, which is unique to everyone. Everyone.
When you say implement, those are the words I can say to another person, or those are the words I can write down in a book.
Yes.
Yes, implementing. Yeah, I like that.
If that's the calling, is to write a book or books, in order to, how many books has Thich Nhat Hanh written? I mean, he's written, God knows how many books. He lived in a hut. Now, it was a hut with a view, but it was a hut. I'm like, okay, he clearly could have, created a hut with more rooms, I suppose, but it was a hut because that wasn't the point. His ego was implementing his divine purpose.
Yeah.
Or you might create music or, anything. Anything.
And I have to say, it becomes, as I've listened and I've reflected on this a lot and listened to our conversation, because I always come back to this at a certain level. It comes down to our attachment. One of the things that always impressed me about Satchidananda, he lived in this incredible house on the hill. When we would go to the ashram, everyone else living in all these interesting communal situations, and some people had their houses, but he had the house. I mean, I used to look at it and go, wow, nice digs if you can get them. But I had the feeling every time I sat with the man that if it was all taken away and he was back dressed in orange in India, it wouldn't matter to him. If you took and he liked to ride around in his cars. Remember, Tom? he had all those cars. He'd ride around the ashram. He didn't have a license. He'd ride around the ashram in all these cool cars. And every time I talked to him, every time I listened, it was like they could all disappear and he would still be Satchidananda.
Because
There was no attachment.
you were hearing his truth in his words.
Right. He just simply, from my interpretation, was that he had no attachment to any of it.
Mm-hmm.
It was there because it serviced his divine purpose. Now, can I do that? Do my asana? Do my body work? Play music? With that same level of attachment?
I remember
Not me.
Mayor Baba talking about helping his aspirants or aspirants to let go of attachments. And one gentleman that he had around him, he invited him to go with him. He was attached to ice cream. And he took him to an ice cream parlor or place, whatever, and said, here. And he just bought him mounds and mounds and mounds of ice cream. He said, eat up, eat up, eat up, And so the guy got sick from eating so much ice cream. And he said, now he's let go of his last attachment. And so that was it. That was his one main attachment was that being attached to having ice cream all the time or something. So there's an element of putting us in situations or helping people be in situations, or even ourselves, where we know we're shown. And letting go of those attachments sometimes takes a really odd, path. So sometimes it's funny, to see how attached we are sometimes.
And it may be enough to just simply contemplate, what I used to say in the classes, what would happen if my iPad disappeared? I love this iPad. I do a lot with this iPad. I read books on it. I catch up on the news on it. I do these things on it. I'm like, could I just have it disappear and have it just be, oh, well, that's cool. I don't know. But it's what it does is it informs, when I do that kind of an exercise, it informs me. And then I can look at it. And I can go, well, I'm not ready just to junk my iPad. But I can acknowledge to myself that there's an attachment there.
Yeah. I noticed you're talking about Satchidananda and all his toys of the house, the cars, the bulldozer and whatnot. And I'm thinking back to my own toys, the motorcycles I have, the tools I have that I build things with. And I recognize the attachment I have to them. If they all disappeared, if the hurricane come through and away they went, I would not simply go, well, they were fun. It would hurt. I'd be trying to replace them.
I think it's a good exercise, because then if it actually happened, which I'm not encouraging.
Thank you.
We may be in a more position to acknowledge the pain and experience the pain, but not be attached to it.
Yeah.
Well, Bruce and I last week talked about our illnesses, and you can be attached to your health. And
absolutely.
So actually going through what Bruce has gone through and what I'm going through, and others, many others, there's, whatever the larger scheme of this is, whether it's all divine purpose working through us, and it's all out of our control. We think our ego is in charge, but there's a whole lot of stuff that happens for us and through us that we don't we don't seem to be in control of. And it's how we deal with those circumstances where we do lose control and where we do lose our attachments that tests us. You know, this is a real challenge to see where you are sometimes, and to see how you handle that. And it comes up. You're going to lose those things sometime.
Absolutely. Because, you know, we live in a world that is impermanent.
Mhm.
And I have struggled a lot with this, the yogic concept of that this world is not real. Because I'd be going, what do you mean it's not real? If I whack my hand with a hammer, it's gonna hurt. What do you mean it's not real? What do you mean the hammer's not real? What do you mean my pain is not real? That's just, what do you mean? What I've realized is what's not real doesn't mean that you can't touch it or feel it. What it means is that it's impermanent
Right.
and that it will change. That hammer will not always be. Your pain, my pain, will not always be. It's impermanent. My effervescent joy is impermanent. It will pass. So what the focus is on what is real. And what's real. It's what doesn't change.
And what do you find that to be?
That is the essence in the heart. That's the knowing of the divine. Because the divine in its revelation in the heart is unchangeable. It will always be. It just is. It is that it is.
It's the most real thing that we have. And I don't think it's necessarily unhealthy to view our lives knowing that that is there. It's like we have a backstop.
That's if you ask me, that's the point.
Yeah.
Is to experience that so fully that we can then get to a point where we live from that space.
Right.
Because when we can experience life. We can experience its pain, we can experience its joy, we can experience all of it without having an attachment to it.
Yeah.
I read a passage by Ramakrishna once, and if I understand it correctly, he was a yogic saint that lived in India. I think he died somewhere in the 1900s, somewhere in there. But he lived in an ashram. He lived an incredibly simple life, He lived in a temple, actually, a Kali temple. And his mother at some point came to live with him. And at some point she died. And he was amazed at the pain and the loss and he was like surprised. But the thing is that it passed through him. He could experience it. He could acknowledge that this was his mother. And of course, she represented Kali to him on earth, as all women did to him. And so it was like, but he wasn't attached to that pain.
That fits Eckhart Tolle's comment about be the space for that pain to exist.
Exactly. Yeah. And I can feel it. It does not, because it isn't me. It's not permanent.
Right. This too shall pass.
Have we got any other comments here? It's almost an hour. Are we? All right, we've got it. Woo! We have survived another ripple effect video, even without our great host.
I hope my iPad is still here.
Yeah. Well, In a temporal phase, yes. So it's too bad Mike couldn't be here and it was through no fault of his own, but we're going to blame him anyway. So thank you all for listening to us, and I'm going to stop the recording now. See you next week.